Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today I'm super excited to share my personal build for the Monk class in Path of Exile 2. A build that absolutely dominated Acts 1 through 3. I'm talking one-shots, effortless clears, and barely breaking a sweat the entire time. When I first started playing the Monk, I had no idea if my choices would work, but what started as pure experimentation turned out as an unstoppable force. Since I know many of you have been struggling to find a solid Monk build for leveling, I wanted to break it all down for you. The skills, the gear, the passive tree, everything that carried me through not just normal difficulty, but now almost all of the cruel as well. Honestly, I haven't had to make a single change to this setup yet, and it's been smooth sailing. I'll probably tweak things once I hit endgame, but for leveling and tearing through both normal and cruel difficulties, this build might just be one of the strongest options for the Monk. Now before we get started, make sure that you hit that like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one. Alright, let's dive in. In most Monk guides you've probably seen, the focus is always on stacking power charges and consuming them with specific abilities. You're gonna hear things like the cold build is better than the lightning build, or even suggestions to mix the two, and simply just fight for your life while collecting power charges and then release them when it's too late. While these strategies might hold true for late game content, they're not the most efficient for leveling. When you're just starting out, trying to focus on power charges or investing heavily in cold damage can actually slow you down significantly. This realization hit me early in Act 1. Instead of chasing power charges, I decided to take a different path, focusing on straightforward damage and speed. Don't get me wrong, power charges are incredibly important for monks, and especially in the endgame. For those unfamiliar, power charges are one of the monk's primary mechanics. When triggered, they allow you to steal a charge from enemies and consume it to empower your abilities. Here's how it works. Enemies can gain power charges when you hit them. You'll notice this as a blue orb floating around them. To steal it early on, you use the ability called Killing Palm, which allows you to stack up to 3 power charges. Killing Palm dashes to the target and executes any enemy with a blue orb, gaining you a power charge. These charges then supercharge your next Falling Thunder ability, which deals devastating damage. Falling Thunder deals decent damage, but its area of effect is pretty small without any charges. Having 1 to 3 of them and using Fall of Thunder makes this ability powerful enough to clear a whole monitor full of enemies. And when paired with a flurry of auto attacks and some other abilities we'll discuss shortly, this combo can be incredibly effective. But here's the thing, it's a little bit slow. While it looks and feels amazing to pull off, the constant setup of stacking and consuming charges really bogged me down. I realized that for leveling, I wanted a build that let me smash through enemies as quickly as possible without having to focus so much on a resource mechanic. So I pivoted, and that's when my Monk really started to shine. Let me show you first how I made that shift and the abilities that made all the difference. In the first few levels, you'll primarily rely on auto attacks to get by. Falling Thunder is an excellent first ability, offering solid AoE damage to clear groups of enemies quickly. The third skill you want to pick up is Killing Palm, which gives you the chance to execute the power charge combo when needed. However, as I mentioned earlier, monks can feel a bit slow and squishy early on, especially when dealing with large packs of mobs or tough bosses. That's where positioning and dodging comes to play. To help with this, I added Glacial Cascade and Frozen Locust into my early build. Glacial Cascade unleashes a line of icy spikes, with the final spike dealing the bulk of the damage. Meanwhile, Frozen Locust is a fantastic mobility tool. It lets you leap backwards, leaving behind a crystal that can be shattered to damage, freeze, or slow enemies. These two skills were invaluable for getting me out of danger, controlling the battlefield, and taking down enemies from a safe distance when needed. At this stage, the gameplay was slow and required careful planning. The rotation looked something like this. Starting with auto attacks to whittle down enemies, use Glacial Cascade to poke from range, follow up with a Killing Palm to gain charges by finishing off enemies or stealing power orbs, and then unleashing Falling Thunder whenever you have 1 to 3 charges. Frozen Locust acted as my emergency button, whether to escape, deal burst damage, or control tough mobs. And since Monk is this slow early on, I wanted to build something aggressive, so when I had an impact on the enemies, it would be a significant one. This meant prioritizing attack speed, critical strike damage, and dexterity, scaling onto the passive skill tree. I started things off by picking up notes for skill speed and attack damage, working my way into flow like water. From there, I grabbed nodes for shock damage, critical strike multipliers, and as much dexterity as I could find. Once I had a strong foundation, I added Killer Instincts for massive attack damage and began progressing towards Harmonic Generator. Initially, most of the small passive nodes were focused on dexterity. However, as my build evolved, I swapped a few into intelligence to support certain abilities that required more intelligence. For leveling though, I recommend sticking heavily to dexterity, and eventually you will start changing a few of them to either strength or intelligence depending on your gear and the support gems you'll need. Now, speaking of gear, up to this point, I prioritized items with evasion rating, energy shield, physical damage, lightning damage, dexterity, and crit. These stats give you a great balance of survivability and offensive power, which is essential for leveling. Here's a pro tip that can significantly boost your damage and make leveling much easier. Gamble for quarterstaffs whenever you can afford it. The monk's weapon plays a massive role in how effective your build feels, and upgrading to a better quarterstaff can completely change your power spike. Additionally, keep your gear up to date as often as possible. Whether you're picking up upgrades from drops, buying them from the vendor, or crafting using orbs you get from disenchanting. Now at this point, you're gonna find yourself breezing through Act 1 story. Eventually, you'll need to add new abilities to round out your kit. Personally, I started experimenting with Contagion, a skill that applies a debuff to enemies, dealing decent damage over time. When the target dies, the debuff spreads to nearby enemies. This was really good because if you have enough intelligence to support it, Contagion can be a very strong pick for leveling, especially since it synergizes well with Killing Palm. You can apply Contagion to a group of enemies, finish them off with Killing Palm to gain charges, and watch the debuff spread for massive value. However, Contagion didn't really stay in my kit for long. While effective, it shifted my playstyle to a slower, more methodical mark and run kind of approach, which didn't really align with my vision for the monk. I prefer a more aggressive charge in and destroy style. That said, if you guys like a more calculated playstyle, Contagion is a pretty viable choice early on. The second ability that I got is one of the most underestimated monk abilities for early leveling, and the one that helped me go through Acts 1 and 2. Vaulting Impact. This ability launches you forward, slamming the ground and dealing massive damage, often one-shotting groups of normal mobs. It's also a lifesaver for escaping bad situations. And while it won't hold up in cruel difficulty or endgame, it's really fantastic for leveling. And the third ability you want to pick up right now is a key ability for the monk called Tempest Bell. This ability is crucial later in the game, so it's a good idea to start using it now so you can familiarize yourself with its mechanics. Tempest Bell relies on combo points, which you generate by auto-attacking enemies. Once you hit 4 combo points, you can place the bell on the ground. Attacking the bell resonates your damage, amplifying it significantly and spreading it to the nearby enemies. It's perfect for boss fights and tougher rare mobs. Or if you piled up like 30, 40, 50 different mobs, you can just place the bell and just destroy everything in a couple of seconds. To use it effectively, build up combo points with auto attacks, drop the bell on the ground, and then hit the bell for massive damage. This ability becomes even more powerful later when we get access to free power charges, but it's still a strong addition to your kit early on. By this point, the gameplay became much more streamlined. I used Vaulting Impact to leap into groups of mobs, killing them in one hit or escaping when things got messy. I continued to rely on auto attacks for most of my damage, occasionally sprinkling a little bit of Contagion for additional AoE. Killing Palm was still my go-to for execution and gaining power charges, while Falling Thunder provided big AoE bursts. Against bosses, the strategy was even more simple. Focus on positioning and dodging, build up combo points, drop a Tempest Bell on the boss and hit it for amplified damage. In the passive skill tree, I stayed consistent with my offensive approach, prioritizing nodes that increase my attack speed, critical damage, and dexterity. After picking up Harmonic Generator, I continued up the tree to grab more dexterity, eventually reaching Endless Circuit and Wild Storm for even more damage potential. Towards the end of Act 1 or the start of Act 2, you'll gain access to a level 5 skill gem, and with that skill gem, picking Tempest Flurry will completely revolutionize your leveling experience. I got mine near the end of Act 1, and as you can see, I didn't immediately realize how powerful it was as I was casually using it while rotating through all the other abilities. Here's my advice. Get Tempest Flurry as soon as possible, and replace your auto attacks with it immediately. With the attack damage and lightning scaling we've already built, this skill will become your highest source of damage by far. And before diving into the next phase of the monk's leveling journey in Act 2, here's a quick rundown of the support gems I used during this stage. Martial Tempo on my Quarterstaff Strike to significantly increase attack speed, and this was done before I replaced it with Tempest Flurry. Perpetual Charge and Innervate on Falling Thunder, granting 35% damage boost and a chance to avoid using powered charges, which allowed for multiple devastating Falling Thunders. Profusion on Killing Palm for better execution efficiency, and Magnified Effect on Tempest Bell to boost its resonance damage. Any additional slots or abilities can be customized to your preference. While the specific support gems don't need to be perfect at this stage, make sure you're consistently upgrading and experimenting with them. Support gems can drastically enhance your kit, even if you'll eventually swap them out for endgame options. So with Act 1 out of the way, it's time to unleash the real power of our build, Tempest Flurry. This ability becomes your main auto attack, allowing you to mow through hordes of mobs effortlessly. The power spike potential of this build really shines here, making Act 2 a breeze. Honestly, I barely used any other abilities beyond Tempest Flurry at this point, focusing instead on ensuring my passive skill tree was optimized to give it as much damage as possible. Keeping my gear updated is another big one, and using the right support gems. At this point, I practically forgot about Falling Thunder, Killing Palm, or anything related to power charges. I was just spamming Tempest Flurry, Vaulting Impact for extra mobility when needed, and Tempest Bell plus Tempest Flurry for bosses. The real game changer early in Act 2 was getting the first Spirit Gem, which allows us to choose our first aura buff, Herald of Thunder. This ability obliterates enemies without even touching them, thanks to our passive skill tree and the lightning and shock damage we've built. It's an absolute powerhouse for clearing mobs quickly and keeping your progression smooth. For the support gems on Tempest Flurry, I went with Martial Tempo like we said before, Crescendo, and Inspiration to increase its attack power, damage, and reduce mana cost. For Herald of Thunder, I used Magnified Effect and Blind. This setup allowed me to breeze through almost all of Act 2 before fine-tuning the build further. As we became more Thunder-centric, it's time to change our cold abilities. You'll want to replace them with Storm Wave and Siphoning Strike. Storm Wave projects a bolt of lightning that deals massive damage, easily replacing Glacial Cascade, and Siphoning Strike dashes to a target and consumes a power charge if the target is shocked. This ability becomes your second method of gaining power charges, especially useful against bosses. Now, up until this point, the gameplay is clean and straightforward. Spam Tempest Flurry and clear every mob in your path. If you find yourself overwhelmed by numbers, spam Storm Wave for massive AoE damage. These two abilities carry you through the entire Act 2. The only addition to your rotation is the Tempest Bell, which you'll drop on bosses. Before moving into Act 3, make sure to complete your Trial of Ascendancy to unlock your Ascendance. For this build and looking into the future, I chose the Invoker, starting the build with Sunder My Enemies. As you move into Act 3, you can take this build even further with two new additions. One ability and one more aura. For defensive purposes, the second aura that you want is Ghost Dance. Given how offensively built this tree is, some extra defense definitely helps. But the highlight of the entire spec though is the Charged Staff, your brand new ability. This ability can only be activated with power charges. Once activated, it transforms into an insane looking staff that deals both melee and AoE damage, making it incredibly versatile. As you progress through Act 3, the charged staff will become more and more valuable as enemies are no longer dying in one shot from your Tempest Flurry. The beauty of this is that you can keep spamming Tempest Flurry and any enemies that are not dead will already be shocked. That's when you dash to them with Siphoning Strike and gather a charge. You can use that one charge to activate the staff and clear an entire zone quickly, or save up 3 charges to activate it for extended duration, increased damage, and speed. For the support gems on the charged staff, I used Innervate and Conduction. On the skill tree, you'll want to progress all the way to the right and pick up all these quarterstaff nodes to maximize your damage potential. Once you get these nodes, you can go back a little bit and add some crit damage bonus, grabbing Essence of the Storm, and then working your way back to some extra defenses with Mindful Awareness. This exact build, with its abilities and support gems, will carry you through the whole Act 3, complete your second Trial of Ascendancy, and even help you clear Act 1 in Cruel difficulty. The rotation is simple yet effective. Spam Tempest Flurry or Shockwave to clear everything around you. If enemies are shocked, use Siphoning Strike to collect charges. Whether you need to activate the charge staff immediately or save up 3 charges for maximum impact, the rotation remains consistent. For boss fights, prioritize getting 3 charges as quickly as possible. Start with Shockwave, then use Siphoning Strike if it shocks the boss to gather a charge. Keep using Tempest Flurry and Shockwave until you have 3 charges. Then pop the charge staff and drop the Tempest Bell. Exhaust the staff's duration on the bell and the boss should be dead. I really hope that this guide helps you have a smoother and more fun time leveling your monk. Let me know in the comments down below if you have any questions or thoughts. Thank you very much for watching, and I'm gonna see you guys on the next one. Peace.